She screamed, "Get out, old lady." The next day, she learned who owned the house. Marilyn Lowell moved through the morning mist that clung to Birchwood Avenue like a thin veil, the dampness settling into the soft curls of her silver-streaked hair. Her worn navy cardigan, faded from years of sun and garden work, brushed against the wild roses she nurtured behind the garden cottage she called home. The scent of earth and fresh blooms filled her lungs, grounding her in a world where she felt useful and known, even if only by the petals unfolding beneath her fingers. For years, Marilyn had lived quietly in this small cottage, tucked behind the grand house's peeling white walls and climbing ivy, a place she and her late husband had cared for together when he managed the property. The heavy brass keys jingling at her side were all she had left from those days, dangling from a faded leather strap pinned to her apron. They bore the weight of a forgotten past, a silent claim to a life that seemed to slip further away each day. That Tuesday was gray and cold. A soft rain pattered lightly against the rose trellis as Marilyn carefully arranged a plate of homemade cookies beside the door for the new tenant. She hoped for small kindnesses in return, a smile, a nod, but the door slammed open with a harshness that cut through the morning calm. Morgan, the young tenant who had moved in just last week, stood in her rain-streaked jacket, eyes sharp and unwelcoming. Her voice sliced through the quiet like broken glass. "Don't make a mess in here. People don't want to see old ladies lounging around." Marilyn's heart sank as she felt the sharp sting of those words, louder and colder than the drizzle on her skin. Inside the hallway, the hand-knit afghan she made lay draped over the wooden stair railing, its soft yarn twisted and worn, a little tag peeking out, "Property of ML," barely visible beneath the folds. It was a fragile thread to her identity, one Morgan clearly wanted to unravel. The whispered judgment hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. "Just trying to be helpful," Marilyn murmured, fingers tightening on the brass keys, feeling their edges dig into her palm. But Morgan's sharp glare didn't waver. She marched past Marilyn, the door swinging shut with a finality that echoed in the empty cottage. There was no place left for hesitation or gentle words here. Marilyn's breath hitched, her mind flickering to the past, the calm certainty she once held in this place, now disturbed by a stranger's hardness. Outside, the rain intensified, the drops hammering the roof like a relentless countdown. Marilyn's gaze caught the faint outline of the brass keys glinting beneath her cardigan, a small symbol of a history that felt both distant and immediate. She swallowed the lump, rising in her throat. Tomorrow's tenants. Meeting loomed in her thoughts, an uncertain battlefield where respect might yet be reclaimed or forever lost. The quiet cottage, her refuge, suddenly felt fragile, teetering on the edge of an unraveling fate. The following morning, the sun filtered weakly through lace curtains of the Birchwood Avenue parlor, where the Tenants Association convened. The polished wooden table bore steaming cups of coffee and nervous faces, but all eyes eventually fixed on Morgan as she swept in with a confident, sharp step. Flanked by Tara, whose practiced smirk seemed permanently etched in place, Morgan wasted no time. Her tone was equal parts sharp and theatrical. "Has anyone else noticed the old lady wandering around like she owns the place?" she said loudly, tilting her head toward Marilyn, seated quietly in the corner. Laughter rippled around the room, a dozen neighbors exchanging knowing looks, while Marilyn's fingers tightened around the chipped teacup she was given. Morgan's words burned in the silence that followed. She painted Marilyn as a meddling figure, prying where she didn't belong. "She's always snooping, trying to boss us, but this is a rental, not her kingdom." There was a coldness in her gaze, but behind it flickered a hesitation, almost imperceptible, a crease of unease when Mrs. Cartwright, the association secretary, shifted her weight and quietly nodded towards Marilyn's side. As the clatter of her pen against the thick meeting agenda broke the tension, Mrs. Cartwright slipped the folded paper across the table towards Marilyn. her cursive note flickering under the overhead light. Discuss lease renewals, 6:30. It was subtle, easy to miss, yet full of meaning. Marilyn's eyes caught the edge of the agenda, a small spark stirring inside her. While the faces around the table focused on Morgan's sharp accusations, in the corner, Joey, maintenance man of many years, steady and unobtrusive, moved to refill the coffee urns. His glance, soft but clear, lingered on the worn, battered keychain hanging from Marilyn's wrist. A brief flicker of acknowledgement passed between them, a silent reminder that Marilyn was not quite forgotten, not yet erased. For a moment, Marilyn allowed herself to breathe in that quiet connection, the scent of strong coffee mingled with polished wood, the afternoon light, warmth brushing her cheek as the meeting slogged on. Outside, the hum of the neighborhood continued unbothered by the storm brewing inside. And as Morgan's voice rose again, cutting through the polite murmurs, the pressure beneath Marilyn's ribs tightened. Not just from humiliation, but a dawning awareness that the landlord's lease renewals held unseen power, a deadline ticking steadily towards June 30th. It was an invitation, not only to endure, but to fight, to prove she still belonged to a place that never quite belonged to her anymore. If a sliver of hope pulled at Marilyn's heart, it came from the margins, Mrs. Cartwright's quiet support, Joey's steady gaze, and the simmering reality that something deeper was within reach, buried beneath the sharp edges of Morgan's sneers and Tara's biting remarks. In the back of her mind, the date circled like a whispered promise, waiting for its moment to arrive. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. Marilyn woke that morning with the quiet determination of someone who had already endured too much to back down now. The bakery's scent wafted faintly from the neighbor's window as she stepped outside, nestling her cardigan tighter around her thin frame against the chilly breeze. She had promised herself she wouldn't disappear into the shadows anymore, not after the meeting yesterday, no matter how sharp Morgan's words had cut. Today, she would try again. Offering to help with the flower arrangements for the upcoming neighborhood gathering seemed harmless enough. Perhaps if she showed willingness, others might let down their guard. But the small bouquet she arranged near the entrance disappeared before the event even started. No one saw who took it, but the empty vase sat like a silent accusation afterward. When she went to collect packages from the front porch, a fragile box labeled "Fragile from Grandma" lay shattered. The delicate china inside cracked beyond repair. A sharp voice from the steps stopped Marilyn. Tara, Morgan's constant shadow, sneering. "Don't bother chasing things that don't belong to you. She just wanders, really, doesn't do much else." The words echoed past Marilyn's ears, heavier than the gray clouds rolling overhead. Later, Marilyn sat on the back stoop, the wooden boards damp beneath her fingertips. The quiet garden around her breathed gentle life, the hum of bees, the rustling leaves, offering a small, tender pause from the coldness of the day. She traced the worn leather strap holding her brass keys, the edges frayed by years, yet still holding strong. For a moment, she considered packing her things, leaving behind the fading home and the biting whiskers. Then, her eyes caught something tucked in the mailbox, a creased envelope with the city seal barely visible under raindrops. Pulling it out, she unfolded the letter. Annual ownership verification required, response due by June 30th. The words burned with stark clarity, not just a bureaucratic footnote, but a lifeline, a detail that could anchor her claim if she dared to grasp it. A splash of sunlight broke through the clouds, cutting a silver path across the wet pavement. That single document, official, demanding, felt like a thread she could hold on to. If she acted quickly, gathered what she needed, there might be a way to reclaim not only her place but her dignity. Her breath caught, hope mingling with doubt, as the deadline loomed like a distant bell, calling her to rise again. That Thursday dawned heavy with rain, each drop pattering against the cottage's small windows like a countdown. Marilyn's footsteps echoed softly on the tile floor as she prepared to clean before the scheduled open house, a task assigned by Morgan with unmistakable sharpness. The chill in the air seemed to seep into her bones, but she moved steadily, dusting and polishing, her fingers tracing the worn armrests of chairs that had witnessed decades of quiet lives. Suddenly, a crunch of boots on the porch snapped her focus. Morgan stood in the doorway, her expression hard, eyes flashing with impatience. "Get out," she ordered, voice crisp and cold, turning not toward Marilyn, but the curious realtors who had entered behind her. Their polite smiles faltered as tension thickened in the room. Marilyn hesitated only a moment, then began gathering her worn cloth and cleaning supplies. As she wrapped the hand-knit afghan, always folded neatly across her arm, one corner slipped free, pulling a battered folder to the floor with a soft thud. Time seemed to freeze as the leather-bound folder unfolded on the gleaming marble, pages spilling open. The reek of old paper filled the room. Marilyn's fingers trembled as she knelt, eyes scanning the familiar script. Her husband's signature adorned the deed to the property. Her name was outlined carefully, a faded yellow highlight marking a clause. Primary residence occupancy, the words stark against the aged paper. The room held its breath with her, the silent weight of history pressing down. Her hands shook, the chill forgotten for a moment, as the lost legal note revealed itself. Hidden, misplaced in the linen closet for months, forgotten until now. The realization struck harder than any insult hurled her way. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was her tether to the home she had nurtured, the proof of a claim some had tried to erase. Morgan's eyes flickered briefly toward the document, a shadow crossing her face. Perhaps doubt, uncertainty, a crack in her steely resolve before it solidified again into cold defiance. Still, the evidence lay bare between them, impossible to ignore. The gathered realtors exchanged uneasy glances, their smiles vanished, leaving a silence as heavy as the rain outside. Marilyn rose slowly, clutching the folder to her chest, heartbeat loud in her ears. She wasn't just an unwanted old lady today. She was a rightful owner, armed with truth. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. That evening, after the day's sharp edges had dulled under the fading sunlight, Marilyn sat at the kitchen table, the faded deed spread before her like fragile armor. The soft glow of a single lamp cast long shadows across the yellowing pages, illuminating the neat signature of her late husband, James Lowell, and her name meticulously inscribed beneath his. The clause marked in faded yellow read clearly, "Primary residence occupancy reserved for owner's personal use and protection." Months ago, this document had vanished in the shuffle of old linens and forgotten drawers, but now it was the keystone of her fight. Marilyn dialed Mrs. Cartwright's number, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The association secretary answered on the third ring. "Mrs. Cartwright, I found the deed. There's a clause, we both know about it, that says only the owner can approve residency changes or evict tenants," Marilyn explained softly, but with determination. "I believe it applies here. Can we review the bylaws together?" The next day, in a quiet corner of the parlor, Marilyn and Mrs. Cartwright spread out the Tenants Association handbook and recent correspondence. Yellow sticky notes marked pages about tenant rights and owner responsibilities. Mrs. Cartwright is standing by. Cartwright's brow furrowed in concentration, then eased into a small, supportive smile. "You're right, Marilyn. Section 4, Clause 12, states that eviction notices require owner consent, and all major tenant decisions must be approved by the property owner. This meeting on June 30th will finalize lease renewals. If you present this properly, it could protect your residents and prevent any unlawful removal." A flicker of hope warmed Marilyn's chest, but she knew the stakes were high. Without clear proof, she risked eviction herself, homeless and unheard. Nearby, the ticking clock on the mantelpiece echoed like a heartbeat, counting down the days and hours before the final vote. Her fingers brushed the brass keys hanging from her apron, the same keys her husband once used to open doors, unlock trust, and hold court in this very place. Those keys were not just metal. They were a lifeline to her past and a symbol she would protect at all costs. Marilyn pictured Morgan's indifferent sneer and Tara's mocking laughs. Yet beneath their harshness, she sensed unease, subtle hesitation in Morgan's eyes during the open house confrontation. Was it doubt? Pressure from the association's rules? Those cracked walls of arrogance might crumble. With Mrs. Cartwright's quiet alliance, Marilyn felt ready to step forward from the shadows. The sun dipped lower outside, painting the stained glass windows with hues of amber and rose. Marilyn folded the deed gently, a resolve settling deep within her. The countdown until June 30th was no longer a threat, but a deadline to reclaim her home, and with it, her dignity. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. The date had arrived. June 30th's morning sun streamed cautiously through the tall windows of the Birchwood Avenue parlor, casting long, golden shafts across the polished wood floor where neighbors gathered. The familiar murmur of whispered judgments and uncertain glances filled the air, a quiet tension hovering beneath the polite smiles and folding chairs. Mrs. Cartwright sat near the head of the room, steady and calm, a small stack of papers taut in her hands. Among the faces, Marilyn stood quietly near the entrance, clutching the weathered deed like a talisman. Morgan's gaze cut across the room, sharp and apprehensive, darting at Marilyn with mingled frustration and surprise. Beside her, Tara folded her arms, still defiantly bold, yet flickers of unease betrayed by the slight wrinkle of her brow. The room stilled as Mrs. Cartwright raised her hand, nodding toward Marilyn. "Mrs. Lowell, the floor is yours." Marilyn's voice was soft but steady, carrying years of quiet endurance as she stepped forward. "My late husband managed this property for many years. This deed," she gestured to the yellowed document displayed on the table, "includes a clause granting me primary residence occupancy and requires owner approval for any residency changes." Her hand traced the faded highlight, her breath steady. "That means only I can authorize lease renewals or evictions here. I have justice on my side." The neighbors leaned in, eyes shifting from the document to Marilyn herself, the woman they underestimated, now casting a quiet, unwavering authority. She lifted the original key from her apron, the brass worn smooth, the name inscribed nearly erased but still present. "This key has opened these doors for decades. It's a symbol of the trust and responsibility, something not easily overridden." Morgan's confident posture faltered. Her voice cracked slightly as she tried to protest, but the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, the whispers turning from doubt to agreement. "Rules are rules," Mrs. Cartwright said firmly, setting down the association bylaws. "And according to our policies, we must honor this claim." The room settled into respectful silence before applause slowly rose, tentative at first, then strengthening as faces softened. Marilyn's heart swelled, not for the applause, but for the recognition. The justice finally acknowledged. She caught a glimpse of Joey in the corner, his eyes warm with support, a quiet nod passing between them. Morgan's expression shifted from defiance to reluctant acceptance. That hesitation, fleeting but real, marked the moment her influence waned beneath the weight of rightful ownership. As the meeting closed, the power shifted visibly. Marilyn no longer the shadow in the corner, but the rightful keeper of these rooms, her dignity restored through truth and perseverance. When dignity finally speaks, who tends to listen in your world? The meeting's final moments swelled with a charge that had been absent for far too long. Mrs. Cartwright, poised and firm, adjusted her glasses and addressed the gathering with unwavering clarity. "By the authority vested in this association," she announced, "we hereby recognize Marilyn Lowell as the legal primary resident and rightful owner of the Birchwood Avenue property. Her claim has been validated by documented evidence and association bylaws." Murmurs rippled through the room, shifting from doubt to acceptance as the weight of truth settled. Morgan's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her features as a formal paper was slid across the table. A written notice requiring her to vacate, citing breach of conduct and unauthorized tenant interference. Tara's defiant snicker faded beneath the growing applause that rose like a wave, sweeping through neighbors who had once been distant or skeptical. One by one, Tenants approached Marilyn, offering quiet apologies and tentative smiles. Warm hands shook hers, eyes softened in newfound respect. Joey, the maintenance man, whose steady presence had been a small beacon in the storm, approached last. Without a word, he pressed a bouquet of freshly picked garden roses into Marilyn's hands, their fragrance bright and hopeful against the heavy air. She breathed in deeply, the scent mingling with the hushed cheers and the soft glow of afternoon light filtering through lace curtains. Marilyn's chest tightened, not with relief alone, but with the profound recognition of finally being seen. Years of quiet endurance had transformed into a moment that belonged to her, a reclamation not just of ownership, but of dignity. The house, once a place of silent reminders, now throbbed with the warm pulse of justice served and community reclaimed. As lingering conversations echoed softly behind her, Marilyn allowed herself a small smile. This was no longer a house shadowed by whispers or harsh words. It was her home, and through gentle perseverance, she had invited others to see her true worth. Her fingers brushed the brass keys hanging from her apron, their familiar weight a symbol of endurance, kindness, and unwavering strength, qualities that had carried her through and would guide her forward. After the storm of the meeting had passed, a calm settled over Birchwood Avenue that felt both new and familiar. Marilyn walked slowly through her beloved cottage, the soft footfalls of her worn slippers mingling with the warm afternoon light, spilling through lace curtains. The brass keys, now shining brightly, hung peacefully from her apron, their familiar weight a steady reassurance. The house, once cloaked in shadows of doubt and whispered scorn, seemed to breathe a quiet sigh of relief alongside her. Outside, the garden burst back to life in vivid color. Roses she had lovingly tended bloomed with renewed vigor, their petals unfurling like memories opened gently after a long winter. Marilyn paused among the blooms, fingers brushing the delicate leaves, the scent sweet and grounding, reminding her that growth often follows hardship. For years, she had been invisible to some. Now, those voices she had longed to hear softly called her name with kindness and respect. Neighbors she barely knew greeted her on morning walks with genuine warmth, smiles replacing the wary glances and whispered judgments. Children waved cheerfully from bicycles, and from across the street, a young mother thanked Marilyn quietly for her steady presence, her words a balm to all the wounds left unspoken. The community had shifted. The house was no longer a battleground, but a place of welcome, thanks to Marilyn's patient courage. In her heart, Marilyn held a simple truth. Justice is not merely law or power, but the triumph of kindness, perseverance, and humility. It is the light that reveals worth beneath assumptions, the steady hand that rebuilds what was threatened to be lost. With each sunrise, the home she cherished became more than walls and doors. It was a sanctuary she inspired and a story rewritten by resilience. Her eyes rested on the familiar Afghan folded neatly on the windowsill, its threadbare fabric whispering of years past and journeys endured. In that quiet moment, Marilyn smiled, a gesture small but profound, echoing in the morning light. She carried forward lessons of grace and quiet strength, ready to face whatever came next, surrounded by the blossoms of hope she had cultivated with loving hands. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.